Thank you, Paul, and thank you for the invite as well. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Paul and the team kindly reached out to ask if I'd be happy to do a bit of an overview or a case study of a bariatric case. So I wanted to just run through the sort of basics, background, costings, timeline, etc., of a case that we completed in Plymouth towards the end of last year. Client's name has obviously been changed, but for the purposes of today, gentleman's name is Jay. As you can see, has a history of obesity, currently weighing 39 stone, osteoarthritis, chronic type 2 respiratory failure, arterial fibrillation, and hypertension, and ongoing difficulties with reduced mobility and also chronic pain. Admitted to hospital in April 22 following acute kidney injury and pulmonary edema. Apologies if I haven't pronounced that correctly. I'm not an OT, and has been an inpatient since, and is currently relying on a high level of care and being hoisted between his bed, his armchair, and his commode. So has quite a very lacking in independence and personal freedom existence, but a really, really nice guy who was involved all the way through the case. Hasn't been able to stand and transfer since his admission, and also has no electric wheelchair. So obviously, independence and everything like that is really difficult. There were concerns about Jay returning to his first full flat, partly because of the logistics of getting him in and out, but also because of his weight and the need for equipment. As you can imagine, a 39 stone gentleman in an upstairs flat. Obviously, there were lots of issues which we also had to consider from a structural point of view with regards to the assistance that we were offering. Ambulance and fire service had also raised concerns around, yes, we could get Jay into the property, but that once he was in there, it would be really difficult, if not near impossible, for him to be independently mobile, and also to be able to get him out in the event of an emergency. So I've listed, it was a massive multi-disciplinary effort for this case, much more so than I would say for what I might call a traditional or a standard DFG. As you can see there were probably lots of stakeholders and parties involved that we would normally see on any case. There are the obvious ones, but also there are, the care provider. So Paul is switching to a new care provider, the hoist installer, but also hospital transport. So we had to make sure that we could get Jay from the hospital to the new flat once it was ready to be occupied. Even from the housing association's point of view, we had the development manager, the operations manager, and the independent living officer. So we had all of those people involved from the housing association, which is more than we would normally expect. But because it is a shared scheme, independent living officer was crucial, and also because of the nature of the works that we were doing in turning a two-bed flat into one, because of the bariatric needs, that meant that we also had the housing operations manager for the Southwest from the HA, who was heavily involved in definitely in the obtaining consent process, but also as things moved along, because as you can imagine, there were, from the HA's point of view, there were cost implications in changing a two-bed to a one-bed, and obviously they needed that sort of future security, if you like, of what might happen with that unit if Jay had ever chosen to leave the unit. So we had the main contractor involved very early on in the process as well, which is quite tricky because we hadn't actually approved the works yet. So obviously that wasn't without its difficulties as well. From the NHS, we had the deputy head of specialist services and a second OT as well as our in-house housing OT, and we also had the ward manager who was aware of Jay and his needs, who had obviously known him for a considerable period of time, the DFG team, and then, like I said, we did have a structural engineer, because of the bariatric needs, but also because we were looking at hoisting, and because 39 stone with equipment in a wheelchair is a considerable point load to be placed at any point within a property. So even though we were looking at a ground floor unit, concrete floor, to satisfy the housing association, we still did employ the services of a structural engineer throughout the case to make sure that everything was fine with regards to, firstly, the ability to install and use the hoist, but secondly, with regards to Jay being able to move around the property as well, and also wheelchair services. So the wheelchair and obviously sourcing that for Jay was a pivotal and really crucial part of the adaptation. So as much as we were already going ahead and talking about clear widths for doorways, which we were widening, it wasn't until further down the process that we were actually able to 100% source a wheelchair that would suit Jay. But and it was basically, as I understand it, the biggest wheelchair, widest wheelchair we could get in the country, but also it had to have an extension kit fitted to it as well. So obviously that was another massive consideration that we had with regards to the case. Um, so with regards to the works themselves, what we were looking at simply was to make a 2-bed unit into a 1-bed unit. It was also a live building all the way through, so we had to work very closely and thoroughly with the contractor. Firstly, around the obvious things like dust, noise, and vibration, but also because within the development there are lots of social events and they have meal times, etc. The contractor had to be sympathetic of that and work with the independent living officer and the development manager around making sure that, knocking down walls and and breaking into concrete floors, etc. That was all done at suitable times of the day, which obviously that introduces its own logistical issues as well. And we were also widening the main door into the actual unit that was going to be occupying. So that meant that we've got a live corridor where we need a suitable and safe working area, firstly for the contractors to knock the existing door out and widen it in order to put the new door in, but also so that we maintained emergency access, but also routine access for any resident within the property. And then a further complication was that there was a wheelchair user further down the corridor. So obviously that had to all be considered as part of the works and the logistics of the programme of works. Um, we were also widening the paved area to a communal courtyard, which meant that Jay was able to access an external space. And like I said, we removed the wall between the 2 bedrooms, which obviously that includes radiators, light switches, etc., plug sockets. All of those were then relocated in order that we had a suitable position for Jay's bariatric bed, but also a chair commode, and then allowing space for manual handling as well. And then in addition to that, we were installing a twin motor ceiling track hoist between the bedroom and the living room. So just so that you've seen them, these are the early sketches. So hopefully you can see my cursor, but if you can't, on the left hand side, we've got the existing as it was layout of the unit. You can see on the left hand side, we've got the living room and kitchen. Bottom right, we've got the bathroom. And then we've got bedroom 1, bedroom 2, and then the hallway that you come into, which is the main door into Jay's flat. What we were proposing and what we did was that the main door into the unit, the door into the living room, the door into the bedroom, and one of the doors into the bathroom, because obviously there's 2 doors, was widened. And then you can see effectively we've removed the dividing wall between the 2 bedrooms, maintained windows, and then we've put a door on an angle so that we could get the clear width that we needed to get in order for Jay and carers to be able to get in and out of the property. And then from the living room, you can see there's a folding door there, so we've got access to an external courtyard space. Um, with regards to the timeline, so I've given a sort of basic timeline there, and what I've done is highlighted as DFG officers the ones that we might be really keen to focus on. So October, we received the referral, valid application November. April, we were able to approve the case. PCC commissioning were able to help us because the HA were concerned that firstly the property was empty, and that obviously if we were earmarking a resident to move in, that obviously somebody needed to cover the rent. But also they were looking at obviously the DFG wouldn't go back and revert it back to a 2-bed unit. So what commissioning have done is basically signed up to an agreement that either, if it's not required for any of the tenant after Jay vacates, if he ever does, then commissioning would pay to revert it back to a 2-bed, or that basically they have first call on it and able to move a current bariatric client into that property as well. So there is an element of future proofing and that goes on, but obviously the HA needed that assurance as part of their consent process, which obviously made it a bit more drawn out to be able to get that consent. You can see going through June, lots and lots of meetings going on all the way through here. You can see we had the initial multidisciplinary team meeting in December 22, which was most of, not quite all, but most of the parties that I'd listed in the list previously. And then in June, we were already having meetings to confirm things like care provision, equipment, from moving Jay from the hospital to the new flat, and then commode, bed, hoist, transport, hospital transport, etc. And then July last year started on site and then completed on site in August last year. So the ones that I've highlighted in bold are basically referral, valid application, approval, and then works completed, which are the ones that we tend to be more focused on from a DFG point of view. I've done some photos of the property post adaptation. So the one on the left you can see, so that is looking from the sort of lobby area back towards the main entrance. So we did also automate the doors within the property, which then, as Jay is in his wheelchair, that will move him back towards being a bit more independent. So you can see that there's a nice big silver push button on there so that he can either exit the property alone. There's also a tannoy system so that if he's got a visitor, that obviously he's in control of who comes into the unit, etc. The next photo along the second one shows from the living room looking back towards the bedroom, so you can see how open plan it's made with the hoist above, and also on the left the door out to the communal garden area outside the property. So very, very light. You can see the sunshine pouring in through there for the client, which was amazing. The third photo is the hoist in the bedroom. Obviously, this is all pre the final bits of equipment going in. And then the fourth one is looking from the bedroom back into the living room. And the last photo on the right there is looking back towards the kitchen. So at present, we hadn't adapted the bathroom and we also hadn't adapted the kitchen because at the moment there isn't the need to do that. But there is a hopefully a strong expectation that we will be going back to do that in the future as part of the client's move back towards independence. So lots of people would probably be interested in the cost. So those are the costs that we had. So you can see just over 62,000 for the total cost of works. It's really easy to look at it and think, well, it's just knocking down a wall and widening a few doorways. Obviously, there was the automation, there was the bits that we had to do to satisfy the fire department. There were other sort of little bits of mechanical and electrical works in there, which is obviously why the figure is 45k. We were always aware that we are removing somebody from a hospital setting. And for the client's own independence and well-being, that is a massive step forward, having been in there for a year or two. But also it means that there's a bed freed up for somebody else to move in, and the 45k in NHS budget is minimal anyway. So just over 60,000 pound total cost of works. Funding was a 30k DFG maxed out, a discretionary full allowance under our independent living policy of 20k, and then we had 12,200 plus any agreed extras and unforeseen works. That was all covered by the NHS. So we'd obviously maxed out our DFG. We'd also maxed out our discretionary in order to basically carry out the works. So I wanted to do just a couple of lessons learned. It was a really successful adaptation, but as always, we did meet afterwards just to sort of see, firstly, that we know that there will be repeats of this case. There are other people with similar needs that are in long-term healthcare and hospital settings, and we're really keen to help them to obviously move back and start to become a bit more independent. The HA consent, we definitely realised that you request that as early in the process as possible. That's the reason that we involved the local area managers for the housing association. There was some back and forth, but we were able to get to a point where we had firstly consent in principle, and then also further down the line obviously received that detailed consent as well, which was amazing news. Ensure funding streams are in place. There are lots of conversations around this of we go ahead and we say, right, this is what the need is, this is how we could meet the need, and then a bit further down the line you talk about how much is it going to cost, and then you start to talk about where is the money going to come from. So we tried to be as realistic as possible about the costs, but obviously with with COVID and with Brexit and lots of other things that are going on with the economy, the costs were really difficult to predict. All we could do is go into it and go, actually, we're committed, we will get to a certain point, discretionary DFG, and then obviously look at what the balance is, and then speak to parties around getting that additional funding. Who needs to be consulted, who needs to be involved, and who needs to be present at meetings. And I've put in brackets there, these can be very, very different. So we never had all of those people in that list around one table. What we did do was focus on the core of attendees, and then you rely on, for example, we might have been staying in contact with the hoist installer and with the main contractor early on, and then bring them in effectively once we're at a point of, talking about, right, this is when we're looking at a start date. Once we've got detailed consent for the works, bring in a main contractor as soon as possible. Like I said, that they are key to the process. And also, we were lucky, our main contractor worked very closely with the hoist installer and with the structural engineer and with building control, which meant it went through really, really smoothly. And the final thing that we did realize is actually, when you look at it, not the cost of it, but when you look at logistically the amount of bits that we had to tick, it is easily to be daunted. But we did say as a project team, the same as smaller works, the same principles still apply. It's just that the amount of works and the amount of people around the table are just that little bit higher. So try not to be put off by the fact that it is a more complex case. So moving forward, Jay did have a guard of honor, an improvised guard of honor when he left the hospital, which was amazing to see. I've seen the video of it. It's incredible. With the healthcare staff waving their woggles, leg lifters, grabbers, walking stick, and a tennis racket. Obviously, he'd become part of the furniture and, a really likable character. So, but at the same time, I have spoken to him since he's moved out. And he's obviously, loving the fact that, he's got that next level of independence, if you like, and that he's got his own space. So going forward, the hope is that we will be looking at a bathroom and kitchen adaptation in the future to help Jay to maintain his personal hygiene, and then also be able to prepare meals and snacks for himself. And the last time I spoke to him was the end of last year, just before Christmas, and that he'd said he was settling in and that he was doing really well. I'll jump back out in case there are any questions, because I haven't seen the chat.
Right, thanks, Steve. Really interesting case. So, kind of in terms of the structural work, how much needed to be how much
Yeah,
needed to be done to the building? I'm presumably mostly for the hoists and kind of making sure that they were secure and safe.
yeah. Very little, actually. The structural engineer's involvement, Paul, was more around satisfying the housing association. The fact that somebody had raised, we've got a 39 stone gentleman in a wheelchair that's going to be moved around, with a concrete floor. So there was very little. It was the structural engineer's input was more around the widening of the doorways to make sure that the lintels and that the structure above that were designed and they were suitable. Apart from that, it was checking the as-built drawings for the scheme itself to make sure that the hoist, and then recommending fixings to the hoist and linking in with the hoist installer. So there wasn't anything preparatory or anything remedial that we needed to do to the actual floor of the property itself.
And did you have any trouble finding kind of suitable equipment like hoists for the weight limit?
Not hoist we didn't. No, not hoist we didn't. I mean, Hillrom were, they're a reputable hoist installer anyway. They were the ones that did the hoist installation for this case. So no, there absolutely wasn't an issue with providing a hoist. No, twin motor, absolutely fine. Obviously operating up to a safe working load. Obviously it's always that dilemma of, where is the weight now and how is it going to progress. Obviously if it's going to keep increasing, then obviously there's an issue. But the expectation is always that Jay will be able to get into that space where, with weight management and with personal choices, obviously that weight starts to come down, and then obviously that makes life easier going forward, and then hopefully we move towards a bathroom and a kitchen adaptation.
Yeah, and presumably having that kind of facility should hopefully make that kind of lifestyle management much easier going forwards for him.
Absolutely, yeah. Massive psychological benefit of actually being out of a healthcare setting and effectively into his own space. That was something, that he was really keen. And a lot of, towards the end, the concern, not the concern, the focus was around, where will my fridge go and where can I put a kettle.
Right.
So, for me, that's brilliant, because that's
Yeah.
the sort of things that lots of us, focus
Yes.
on when we move house. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So yeah,
Yeah.
it was incredible.
Yeah. So there's a couple of
Yeah.
couple of questions on the chat. So,
Yeah.
could you view separate DFGs for different purposes to allow more funding, i.e., access to bedroom, access to outside space? Was this kind of scheme funding limited? I guess is the question, or was everything that needed to be done for the time being? And
Everything was done that
yeah,
needed to be done for the time being. Yeah, it's always it's always that dilemma, isn't it? Where you go, it's really tricky when you go, you welcome one for each individual need. against the fact that, obviously we're always monitoring our budget and looking at helping as many people as possible. If I'm honest, I wouldn't have estimated it would have been 45, 50k for the building works, and the hoist, or 60. I would have probably said it would have been a bit less than that, but I think therein lies the dilemma for a lot of us grants officers, is trying to predict what the costs are, and sometimes you rely on your historic knowledge and your knowledge base, but sometimes they can be a little bit out. So no, we didn't plan to look at it as different needs, and obviously it's all worked out fine.
And Sue was asking about the bathroom. Are there kind of plans on how that will be adapted as and when that's
There are
required?
already, yeah, there are already, yeah. We've already widened the door into it, Sue, and that we've already had conversations around the size of the tray, potentially looking at a shower toilet as well. So yeah, we that was one of the things we needed to make sure, because what we didn't want to do was go in and make it one bedroom and then find that in the future for Jay we would have to increase the size of the bathroom. So the bathroom is already there, and that obviously when he is at that point we will be able to hoist into the bathroom as a first provision, but we will be able to look at putting in a level shower and toilet and everything as well.
Steve was asking about, do you know kind of how much social care will potentially be saving through having those adaptations done?
I'm really sorry, Stephen. I don't know off the top of my head. I did try and get in contact with the hospital for the last couple of days, and it's proved very tricky. I tried to look up on sort of some of the central government figures of what they say. I think some of them for like critical care they say around £1,800 a day, which if you take that over a year or two, I think I worked it out as a year. It's about 600 grand or something, but please don't quote me on that. Obviously I've chosen to focus more on the individuals, the benefits for the individual rather than the costings of it. So no, I'm sorry, I don't know that.
But even I suppose on a fairly conservative, I don't know, £700 a day, it's not going to take many days, is it?
No, exactly. And if you said £700 a day, you're probably looking at 300 grand a year, and that's this year and next year and the year after and the year after. And and it's cost the NHS effectively the top up bit of money on top of the discretionary.
Yeah. There was a couple of questions about NHS funding, and
Yeah,
companies mentioned that they don't think they've achieved that ever in West Sussex. So,
yeah.
what's the secret of your success in terms of getting the NHS involved?
Don't know. Nice eyelashes, possibly. I don't know. I really, I really don't know. I think in all seriousness, it was a massive team effort. Obviously, if we'd have had our choice, we'd have put in less discretionary, and then it would have been topped up even more. But that's what the DFG is there for. That's what our policy is there for. And obviously, we've luckily had senior manager approval to be able to do that. There isn't any secret apart from it was it was a case that was brought to us by commissioning around somebody that was in a long-term healthcare setting. We've had those ongoing conversations, and it's come to a point where we're talking about costs, and then obviously the request has gone in, and it's been approved. So I don't have any magic wand or passphrase or anything like that, I'm sorry to say.
And Charlotte had done the question too, but basically, there isn't really any minimum timescale between
No,
you and
not
DFG.
at all. No, not at all. And if I'm honest, Charlotte, for any client, it's always really tricky. And I know OTs, do get a bit of slack sometimes. But if for this particular case, we completed it towards the end of last year, August, September. If it had come back in early this year and went, actually, this is the way that Jay is going, we need to consider a bathroom, then absolutely, that's what we should be doing. Like Paul said, there isn't a timescale between the previous DFG and the next one. It's always remarkably hard for OTs, and they have my utmost respect for adult cases, but definitely for children's cases, trying to predict needs can be really hard, sometimes impossible. So I've been in PCC for about 14 years. We have had clients that have come back 4 or 5 times, through the same process, for varying needs. So yeah.
Great. Thanks, Steve. And thank you for mentioning the difficulty of children's cases. That segues perfectly into our next slide.
Did it?
But thank you for that, Steve. Thank you for presenting the case. And yeah, look
You're
forward
very
to seeing you
welcome.
when we come down to Plymouth next month.
Thank you. Thank you,
Great.
everybody.